You really think people are going to invest in that? My wife Olivia looked at the presentation on my laptop, smiled, and shook her head. Ethan, this is not a business. It is just an expensive dream. I still remember those words because they were not spoken by a stranger, a competitor, or someone who did not understand what I was building. They came from the person I expected to believe in me the most. My name is Ethan Parker, and for the past 2 years, I had been building a startup that I believe could change the way small businesses manage their financial decisions. I knew it was not an easy path. Starting a company from nothing required patience, sacrifice, and the ability to keep moving even when results were not immediate. But I also believed that every meaningful idea looked impossible before someone proved it could work. Olivia was not a bad person. That was the part that made everything complicated. She was intelligent, ambitious, and successful in her own right. At 36 years old, she was already a respected executive at a major financial company in Chicago. She understood markets, investments, and business strategy. I admired her drive. I admired the way she built her career through discipline and determination. But somewhere along the way, she started measuring my choices through the standards of her own success. To her, a successful person had a large office, a recognized title, and a predictable income. My life looked different. I spent long nights reviewing data, improving our platform, and talking with potential partners who saw possibilities where others saw uncertainty. I worked from a small home office instead of a corporate building. I wore simple clothes instead of expensive suits. From the outside, it probably looked like I was struggling. What people could not see was the progress happening behind the scenes. They could not see the customers who believed in our product. They could not see the improvements we were making every month. They could not see the conversations I had with people who understood the future of the industry. That evening, Olivia sat across from me at the kitchen table while I explained my latest plans. I was excited because I had reached a point where I believed the company was ready for its next stage. I wanted to share that excitement with my wife. Instead, I watched her expression change from curiosity to doubt. Ethan, I love you, but you need to be realistic, she said. You left a stable career for this. At some point, you have to admit when something is not working. I listened quietly. Part of me wanted to argue. I wanted to show her every document, every projection, and every reason I believed in the company. But I realized something in that moment. People rarely change their minds because of explanations. They change when reality gives them a reason to see things differently. I understand why you feel that way, I said calmly. But I am not giving up on this. Olivia looked surprised by my confidence. She expected disappointment. She expected me to question myself. Instead, I simply returned to my office and continued working. I did not know it yet, but the next morning would bring a message that would completely change how people viewed my startup. The dream Olivia laughed at was about to become the opportunity everyone wanted to be part of. The morning after Olivia dismissed my startup as nothing more than a dream, I woke up earlier than usual. I expected to feel disappointed, but what surprised me was how calm I felt. I had spent enough time building this company to understand one important truth. Not everyone would believe in an idea at the beginning. Sometimes the hardest part of creating something new was not the work itself. It was continuing forward when the people around you could not see what you saw. I walked into my small home office, opened my laptop, and started reviewing the latest numbers from my startup. The office was simple. A wooden desk, a few notebooks, a coffee mug, and a wall covered with notes about the future we were trying to build. To someone else, it might have looked like a room where someone was chasing an uncertain dream. To me, it was where every decision, every challenge, and every small victory came together. My startup was not built overnight. It started with a problem I noticed years earlier. Small businesses often had difficulty making smart financial decisions because they lacked access to the same tools and information available to larger companies. I believed technology could change that. I believed a simple, intelligent platform could help business owners understand their finances better and make stronger decisions. The challenge was convincing others to believe it too. Many investors looked at early numbers and focused only on what was missing. They saw a young company without a long history. They saw risks before opportunities. But I saw something different. I saw customers returning because our product helped them. I saw business owners sharing positive feedback. I saw a future that had not arrived yet, but was slowly becoming possible. Around noon, I received an email from a venture group I had contacted several months earlier. I almost ignored it because I assumed it was another polite rejection. I had received enough of those to know how they usually sounded. But this message was different. They wanted a meeting. They had reviewed our latest progress and wanted to discuss a potential investment. I read the message twice because I wanted to make sure I understood it correctly. This was not a promise of instant success. It was not the final step, but it was proof that someone outside of my small circle was beginning to see what I had been building. I spent the afternoon preparing for the meeting. I reviewed our growth numbers, customer feedback, and future plans. I knew I needed to explain not only what our company did, but why it mattered. That evening, Olivia came home from work and noticed that I was still working. "Another late night?" she asked. Her tone was not harsh, but I could hear the concern behind it. "Actually, something interesting happened today," I said. She looked curious. "What happened?" I thought about telling her everything. I thought about sharing the email and explaining that the startup she questioned was starting to attract serious attention. But I decided to wait. Not because I wanted to hide it from her. I simply wanted the results to speak for themselves. "I had a good conversation with some people interested in the company," I answered. Olivia nodded, but I could tell she still had doubts. She smiled politely and went upstairs. She had no idea that while she was preparing for another busy day at her successful company, my startup was taking its first major step toward becoming something much bigger than either of us expected. The days following the investment meeting felt different, but I tried not to let excitement change the way I worked. I had learned that early success could be just as distracting as failure. When things went wrong, you had to stay focused. When things went well, you had to stay focused even more. My startup was still young, and there was still a lot to build. The potential investor did not make a decision immediately. They wanted to understand our vision, our customers, and the long-term opportunity. I respected that process because I knew real partnerships were built on trust, not just numbers. Over the next few weeks, I continued improving the platform and preparing for the next stage. My small team worked harder than ever. Everyone understood that we had reached an important moment. We were no longer just trying to prove that our idea could work. We were showing that it could create real value for people. Every customer conversation became more important. Every piece of feedback helped us improve. Every challenge became an opportunity to learn. What motivated me most was not the possibility of financial success. It was knowing that our work was helping people who needed better tools. I remembered the reason I started the company in the first place. I wanted to solve a problem that many businesses faced but few people were addressing. Meanwhile, Olivia continued focusing on her own company. From the outside, everything looked perfect. She had a respected position, a strong reputation, and a team that trusted her leadership. But I started noticing small changes in the way she talked about work. She mentioned new challenges in the industry. She talked about competitors moving faster and customers expecting more advanced solutions. I listened carefully, but I did not try to connect those problems to my startup. I never wanted her to think I was waiting for a chance to prove her wrong. That was never my goal. One evening, Olivia came home later than usual. She placed her laptop on the table and sighed. "The market is changing faster than anyone expected," she said. "Companies that adapt quickly are going to have a huge advantage." I looked at her and smiled slightly because those words were exactly what I had been thinking about for years. "I think you are right," I replied. "Sometimes the biggest opportunities come from recognizing changes before everyone else does." She looked at me for a moment. "You really believe that startup of yours can make a difference, don't you?" It was the first time she had asked that question without doubt in her voice. I answered honestly, "Yes, I do. But believing in something does not mean you know everything will be easy. It means you are willing to keep working when the outcome is uncertain." Olivia did not respond immediately. She simply nodded and changed the subject. But I could tell something had shifted. Maybe she was beginning to see that my decision was not about chasing a fantasy. It was about building something meaningful. A few days later, my team received confirmation that the investment group wanted to move forward with the next stage of discussions. This was the opportunity we had been preparing for. But what I did not know was that another company was about to face a serious challenge. And that company was the same one where Olivia had built her entire career. Soon, the startup she once questioned would become connected to the future of the business world she trusted most. The next few weeks brought unexpected changes for both my startup and Olivia's world. While my team was preparing for the next investment discussions, I noticed that the energy around Olivia's company had become different. She was still confident when she walked through the door, but I could tell something was weighing on her mind. The conversations she once had about successful projects and future plans were slowly being replaced by questions about uncertainty and competition. One evening, while we were having dinner, Olivia received a phone call from one of her colleagues. I could see her expression change as she listened. She remained professional, but there was a seriousness in her voice that I had not heard before. After the call ended, she placed her phone on the table and took a deep breath. "The company is facing a bigger challenge than we expected," she said. I listened without interrupting. She explained that several major competitors had introduced new technology that was changing customer expectations. The company had strong resources, talented employees, and years of experience, but they were struggling to find a solution that would help them adapt quickly. "We have people analyzing the situation," she said, "but everyone seems to have a different opinion about what direction we should take." I understood exactly what she meant. Large companies often had many talented people, but sometimes the size of an organization made it harder to move quickly. Too many layers of decision-making could slow down innovation. That was one of the reasons I had created my startup. I wanted to build something that could respond faster to changing needs. But I did not say that. I simply asked questions and listened. "What do you think the company needs most right now?" I asked. Olivia looked at me thoughtfully. "Honestly, I think we need a new perspective," she answered. "Someone who can see the problem differently." Her answer stayed with me because I knew the irony of the situation. The solution she was searching for was connected to the very thing she once believed was unrealistic. But I still said nothing. I wanted her to discover the truth naturally. The next morning, I received a message from my investment contacts. They had completed their review and wanted to move forward with a larger conversation about my startup's future. This was the moment my team had been working toward. But later that same day, Daniel Brooks, the CEO of Olivia's company, reached out to me unexpectedly. We had never worked together before, but he had heard about my startup through industry connections. His message was brief. He wanted to discuss a potential partnership. I stared at the screen for a moment because the timing felt impossible to ignore. The company that Olivia had spent years helping build was now interested in the technology one had created. I agreed to meet with him, but I kept the conversation private. Not because I wanted to hide anything from Olivia. I simply wanted to understand what they needed before making assumptions. When I arrived at Daniel's office, he explained the situation clearly. His company needed a way to adapt quickly, and traditional approaches were not giving them the results they needed. Then he said something that made me realize how much everything had changed. "We believe your startup may have the solution we have been searching for." I sat there quietly, thinking about the night Olivia laughed at my idea. She had believed I was chasing a dream. Now, the same dream was becoming something a major company desperately needed. And soon, Olivia would have to face the reality that the person she underestimated had been building exactly what her company was looking for. The meeting with Daniel Brooks became one of the most important conversations of my career, but I did not walk into his office looking for recognition. I walked in looking for understanding. I wanted to know exactly what his company needed and whether my startup could truly provide value. Daniel explained that his organization had spent months trying to solve the challenge internally. They had experienced executives, talented employees, and strong resources, but they were moving too slowly in an industry that was changing faster every year. "We do not need another temporary solution," Daniel told me. "We need something that can help us adapt for the future." I listened carefully because I knew that technology alone was never the complete answer. A successful solution needed to understand people, businesses, and the problems they faced every day. I asked questions about their customers, their current systems, and the obstacles preventing them from moving forward. The more information I gathered, the clearer the opportunity became. My startup was not designed to replace what they had built. It was designed to help companies make better decisions using information they already had but were not using effectively. Daniel reviewed our approach and immediately saw the connection. "This is exactly the kind of thinking we have been missing," he said. I appreciated his words, but I remained focused on the work. I knew that one conversation did not create success. Trust had to be earned through results. Over the next several days, my team and I worked closely with Daniel's representatives to explore a possible partnership. We prepared demonstrations, reviewed technical details, and answered questions about how our platform could support their goals. Every discussion brought new challenges, but it also showed us that the opportunity was much larger than we originally expected. Meanwhile, Olivia was still unaware of how closely our two worlds were becoming connected. She knew her company was searching for answers, but she did not know that those answers were coming from the startup she once questioned. One evening, she mentioned that her leadership team was considering several outside options. "We may need to work with a smaller company that understands innovation better," she said. I looked at her and asked, "What kind of company?" She paused for a moment. "A startup with a different approach." I almost smiled because I understood the situation completely. The irony was impossible to ignore. The idea she once considered unrealistic was becoming exactly what her company needed. But I still did not tell her. I wanted to respect the process and allow the opportunity to develop naturally. A few days later, Daniel invited me to present my startup solution to a group of executives. I knew this meeting would be different from any previous presentation. These people were not simply evaluating an idea. They were deciding whether to trust a new approach for an established company. When I entered the conference room, I noticed several familiar names on the attendee list. One name stood out immediately: Olivia Parker. For a moment, I wondered what would happen when she realized why I was there. Would she feel embarrassed? Would she become defensive? I did not know, but I knew one thing. I was not there to prove her wrong. I was there because I believed in what my team had built. And now, the woman who had once laughed at my startup was about to see its value from a completely different perspective. The morning after everything changed, I realized that silence had become the only place where I could still think clearly. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee growing cold in my hands, watching sunlight move slowly across the floor we had chosen together years ago. Every corner of that room carried a memory. The family dinners, the late nights, the small conversations that once made ordinary days feel meaningful. But now every familiar detail felt different, like I was looking at a home that belonged to someone else. I did not make sudden decisions. I did not let anger control my next move. After everything I had learned, I understood that the truth was not something to chase with emotion. It was something to face with patience. Over the years, I had built my life around responsibility. I showed up when things were difficult. I worked through exhaustion. I kept promises even when nobody was watching. I believed that was what commitment meant. But I also learned that loyalty cannot survive when only one person is protecting it. As the days passed, I started noticing the difference between the life I remembered and the reality in front of me. Conversations became shorter. Explanations became carefully chosen. Small moments that once felt natural now felt like rehearsed performances. I was not searching for reasons to be hurt. I was trying to understand when we stopped being a team. That question stayed with me longer than anything else. When did we stop choosing each other? I spent years believing that patience could repair anything. I thought if I worked harder, listened more, and gave more, the distance between us would disappear. But sometimes a person can spend so much time holding a relationship together that they forget to ask whether the other person is holding the other side. My decision was not about revenge. It was about finally respecting myself enough to stop pretending everything was fine. I began organizing my thoughts, protecting the things I had built, and preparing for conversations that needed honesty instead of emotion. For the first time in a long time, I was not reacting to someone else's choices. I was making my own. There was a strange calm that came with that realization. The fear of losing something familiar slowly became smaller than the need to find peace. I looked around the house one evening and remembered the man I was before all of this happened. I remembered his confidence, his hopes, and the promises he made to himself. That man was still there. He had just been buried under years of trying to keep everyone else comfortable. The next chapter of my life would not be defined by what was taken from me. It would be defined by what I chose to rebuild. And this time, I would build it on truth. The days that followed were quieter than I expected. I thought making a decision would bring a storm, but instead, it brought a strange sense of stillness. I woke up each morning, made my coffee, and followed the same routine I had followed for years. The difference was that I was no longer pretending. I was no longer trying to convince myself that everything could return to the way it was. Some truths do not arrive with a dramatic moment. Sometimes they arrive slowly, through the small details you can no longer ignore. I started looking at my life with clearer eyes. I reviewed the things I had built, the responsibilities I carried, and the choices that brought me to this point. For years, I had measured success by what I could provide for others. A stable home, a reliable income, a comfortable life. But I had forgotten that a person also needs respect, trust, and honesty. Those things cannot be purchased or repaired with more effort. They have to be given freely. I began taking steps to protect my future. I organized documents, reviewed finances, and made sure every decision was based on facts instead of emotions. It was not about winning against anyone. It was about making sure I did not lose myself while trying to save something that had already changed. During those quiet hours, I thought about the beginning of my marriage. I remembered the early years when we were building everything from nothing. We had simple dreams back then. A comfortable home, a peaceful life, a future we could share. I remembered the person I was when I made those promises. I was someone who believed love meant standing beside another person through every challenge. That belief was not wrong. What changed was realizing that standing beside someone does not mean standing alone forever. One evening, I sat on the back porch and watched the neighborhood lights turn on one by one. Families were gathering for dinner. Children were riding bikes on the sidewalk. Life continued around me, ordinary and steady. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. I understood that my story was not ending. It was changing direction. The hardest part was accepting that the future I imagined was not the future I was going to live. But sometimes losing an old dream creates space for a new one. I did not know exactly what the next chapter would look like. I did not know how every conversation would unfold or how long the process would take. But I knew one thing. I was finally moving forward with honesty. The person looking back at me in the mirror was no longer someone waiting for answers from another person. He was someone ready to create his own. And that realization gave me a strength I had not felt in a very long time. The final conversation was not the dramatic moment I once imagined. There were no raised voices, no need for a perfect speech, and no single sentence that could erase years of confusion. Instead, it was calm, almost surprisingly calm. After everything I had carried inside, I finally understood that peace does not always come from getting the answers you want. Sometimes it comes from accepting the answers you already have. I sat across from her and looked at the person I had shared so many years with. I saw the memories, the struggles, and the moments that once meant everything to me. I also saw the distance that had grown between us. There was sadness in that realization, but there was also clarity. We talked about the future, about the choices that brought us here, and about the reality that we could no longer ignore. I did not need to prove that I was right. I did not need to make her feel the same disappointment I had felt. Carrying that weight would only keep me connected to the past. What mattered was accepting what happened and choosing what came next. Over the following weeks, I focused on rebuilding my own life. I returned to the things I had neglected. I spent more time with friends who reminded me who I was. I found peace in simple routines, morning walks, quiet evenings, and conversations that did not require me to pretend. I learned that starting over does not mean forgetting everything that happened. The past still exists. The memories still matter, but they no longer have the power to control the person you become. There were moments when I missed the old days. I missed the version of us that existed before everything changed. But I also realized something important. Sometimes we hold on to memories because we are afraid of admitting that the present is different. We protect the picture of what something used to be, even when the reality has already moved on. A few months later, I stood in my kitchen one morning with sunlight coming through the windows. It was the same place where I had once felt uncertain and lost. But it felt different now. Not because the house had changed, but because I had. I was no longer waiting for someone else to choose me. I was choosing myself. The road ahead was not perfect. There were still difficult days, unanswered questions, and moments of doubt. But there was also something I had not felt in a long time. Hope. I finally understood that my value was never determined by someone else's opinion of me. It was built through the choices I made, the promises I kept, and the person I continued to become. Looking back, I realized the hardest part was not losing the life I thought I had. The hardest part was finding the courage to create the life I deserved. And standing there in that quiet kitchen, I knew I was finally ready for whatever came next.